They already played Endgame all the way to level 100, and they answer a few of our questions. We also have an interview with video game producer Rod Ferguson going into detail about dungeon design, class balance, and a few other endgame modifiers and systems. We got a lot to talk about. What's up world, Utopia here, back in with another video, and today we're checking out all things Diablo 4. And so for now we're going to specifically go into the Rod Ferguson interview as it has a lot of details around the dungeon design, class balance, and a few other notable things that I talked about before. Now we'll just go over the key questions to make sure that we can leave out any filler. And first up, they did mention that couch co-op would be a console-only feature, but that was confirmed a long time ago. But they did actually outlay exactly why this is, and they were asked several questions about it, so I'll kind of condense those down. But essentially they explained that the problem lies with Battle.net being on the same computer for two different accounts. So basically you can't load up Battle.net twice, and there's an issue there. They don't want to, there's probably some like monetization, DRM issues there. Just a small example would be like multi-boxing, but people used to do this multi-boxing thing and you had to use VMs. You couldn't just run Battle.net on the same computer and then open up a bunch of them. So in one aspect that does kind of make sense why there isn't any co-op on PC. Now next up we have the Butcher, and I actually did get to experience him. It was really cool, and the first time that I fought him I didn't realize there was a timer, and so I was trying to kite him with my dragons, my little dragon heads as a sorcerer, and I ended up running out of time. The second time I actually did end up getting him down. They also asked if the Butcher was in the December build, which they replied to no, it wasn't. And they also asked if there would be other types of content like the Butcher in different dungeons. And they said, yeah, there's possibly some other Butcher-like surprises that will happen. And they said because it's a live service game that they'll add things like that as well. They also went into detail if there's any conditions around the Butcher and him appearing, and if there's like a certain level requirement, which they said that there might be a minimum level restrictions, and there might be a few others, but it's meant to be very random and very unexpected. Now here's a big controversial one, as a lot of people were having issues with the dungeon design and not really liking the little lever system and all the little different mechanics that you had to do where you had to go get the little puzzle pieces and bring them back. So they asked if there was any type of change there or if they're looking at that feedback. Now there is one key quote here where he said, "We don't want players to be running through an empty dungeon in cases where you're going to get a key and running back through an area. There should be enemies there showing up to refresh that. It is a goal of ours that you're not running through an empty dungeon basically ever. It can be okay for a short periods of time." And they did also mention that there was hundreds of dungeons and that this was only 20% of the actual world. And they also went on to note that we were just in Fractured Peaks region and that the dungeons in that region were going to be the same as every other dungeon in that area. And so kind of all the mechanics and everything kind of aligned together, and that they would be different essentially in other areas. Now they did also mention that there is a nightmare dungeon system, and this will have a sigil modifier that will like change the dungeon with buffs and nerfs, and hopefully will make the experience a little different each time. However, it seems like people still have their concerns about that, as it might just be a Mythic Plus type system. We'll have to see how it plays out. And in this next question, the interviewer actually went into a lot of detail about the class balance. And they even mentioned that they had all three characters to level 25, and they asked how it did feel a lot easier to play as a sorcerer compared to a barbarian, or a ranged rogue compared to a melee rogue. And they asked was there some type of balance that could happen there, and that they could maybe adjust barbarian a little bit, maybe get them going at the start. And they went into quite a lot of detail answering this question about all the different types of things, but they really just essentially said that barbarian has a lot of legendary slots and will have a lot more slots for gear. In fact, they have 3 more slots than the average class, depending on if there's other classes that have more slots, we don't know yet. So they said basically that barbarian is going to be kind of weak at the beginning, and they didn't really conclude to them being able to fix that. They kind of essentially said that eventually the barbarian might be one of the strongest classes by level 40, which seems a little bit disappointing because I feel like a lot of people are not going to have a really fun time playing that class. So I hope they adjust either something with barbarian or maybe adjust mechanics to more so kind of put a little weight on ranged, so they kind of feel the same weight as the barbarian does. But they seem like they want to make all the classes really accessible, and it seems like they're like, if you just want to play the class because it's cool, that's kind of what we want, more so than there being like this higher skill gap. They said that there's no classes that require a higher skill gap, although I would say that at the beginning of the game and you're playing on maybe the hardcore mode, the barbarian is probably going to be one of the harder classes and one of the higher skill classes. At least that's what I would think. So this is kind of an odd answer here overall, and I really do hope they kind of take a lot of the feedback from the open beta and they really do hopefully adjust barbarian, although it kind of makes me nervous for open beta. If everybody thinks the barbarian class is kind of weak, there's probably not going to be a lot of people that are going to take the class, and and then they might not get a lot of feedback, but hopefully that's not the case. Now, we do have someone here that actually played through Endgame Beta, and they played all the way to level 100. This was back in either closed beta or closed alpha, but they said, I have played the Endgame Beta, and let me tell you this, Nightmare Dungeons are absolutely not a much different experience as Rod Ferguson claims here. What you see in the open beta is pretty much what you get in the endgame with sprinkles on top of them. And someone did ask, how good are those sprinkles? To which we replied, here are some of the things you can expect. So at the beginning they did say there's going to be limited revives. You'll deal X more damage, and this depends on the damage type. You'll also gain attack speed and movement speed after downing a monster up to 10%. Your base stat will also be increased. It seems like there's just a lot of stat changes there once you play the Nightmare mode. The monsters will also deal more damage, they'll take less damage, and they'll be reduced to vulnerabilities. Monsters will also attack slow players, and they will also reduce the player's dodge chance. And after downing them, sometimes they'll leave a thing that will explode. They said, however, the layouts, the objectives are all the exact same, which is a little bit unfortunate to hear. Now, there was some comments here that were not happy with that as well. There was also another massive post here from somebody that also played in the beta, and they said, after today's interviews, it needs to be said, the dungeon experience won't be improved with sigils. This is also being backed by another counterpart, and they did go into detail here, and we'll go over a few things from their post. And they did say that the Nightmare Dungeons will have the exact same objectives to complete the same thing that the previous poster said. And they did go on to say that on top of objectives, monster density is also seriously lacking. They also described the two objectives, which is just the return the pedestals one and the down all monsters in X whatever sector. And they just said that these objectives are relatively really boring, and that Nightmare sigils don't really enhance this experience, and they don't change this at all, and they're all kind of the same thing, which does kind of contradict the interview that Rod gave. Now, maybe some things change, although we're coming up on now 2.5 or 3 months till this game releases, and there's just not a lot of time for them to be able to fix this stuff. Mostly that beta was for a lot of the technical capabilities with the servers, at least that's what I would assume, and that's also what they pointed out in their previous interview. So all in all, we'll have to see how this goes, and I'm going to try to enjoy my experience no matter what. It did seem a little repetitive, but again, this was only to level 25, and I still had 2 characters. I made 2 level 25s. And one even being on hardcore, so that was kind of cool to play. So I'm still excited to play this open beta weekend and try out Necromancer. Kind of want to know and we're curious what you guys are going to try out and what class you're going to play. Hopefully there's a lot of barbarians that are still going to try to play that class to hopefully get some feedback in time for release. But if you enjoyed today's video, I'd like a like and subscribe, and until the next one, deuces.